interdisciplinary approach by developing also at the same time not only biological method but also a physical one. Since my PhD is interdisciplinary, so it's in biology and in physics. Okay, so Samash, let's go. Thank you. So, no. Voilà. Allez. So just before to start, I would like a little bit to introduce myself in 1 minute. I'm Carlotta, again, I'm a first year PhD student, and I have, I would say, a very mixed formation. In fact, in Italy, during my high school, I was more concerned about human sciences. I did 5 years at the Classical Lyceum in Italy. After that, I get passionate about science, and in particular about agronomy and food technology. And I got my bachelor in Perugia, in Italy, on this topic. And just after, I wanted to focus my attention more in detail on the relation between the plant and the pathogen. And because of that, I did a master here, a master in biocontrol solution for plant health.
Most?
Yes, exactly.
I teach the...
Yes. You gave me a class.
Okay.
Yes. The word is more.
just a class of 4 hours. Okay.
Yes. Okay. A small one, but interesting one.
Thank you.
Okay, so life is very interesting, and now
you can put a photo of Jean-Sylvestre.
Yes, I should have put the photo of Jean-Sylvestre, right. And now since October, sorry, I started my PhD, my interdisciplinary PhD. Okay, this was just a small presentation on who I am and what I'm doing. So to begin, for me, as I just said before, was a little bit difficult to beginning at the beginning to think about the a priori object in my research for many reasons, because as a scientist, not really scientists for the moment, but as future scientists and as biologists, we are not very used to do this kind of philosophical reflection on what we are doing. So this was the first challenge. And the second challenge for me was to find some common points, some common words that I could share with you, because I knew that probably I was maybe the only one from the scientific field, and that's could be hard to a little bit exchange with you. So I said, okay, what is the common point, the common action that we all share probably in this room? And I thought about that, and for me, what is in common among us is the activity of making research. So I start my reflection by thinking a little bit on what does it mean do research. So since I'm passionate about etymus, I went to search for the word research, and according to its etymology, research comes from the Latin circare, which literally means going around and looking for something. The suffix "re" before the verb circare intensifies this action of looking around for something, and it makes it in a more extraordinary way. It makes it a more extraordinary exploration of the space with the aim of identifying our original question object, with the aim of define it, of understand it, and of circumscribere our question object in a more defined and accessible space. So this is what I think is research and what maybe is the common point among us. Okay, but then I thought research for something in a space very complicated and can take a lot of time if you don't have a kind of methodology that help you in this kind of activity. And in this context, I thought that for me, at least, epistemology, what I consider epistemology, can be a little bit like something, a science that help us in our research activity, so that can support us, yes, while we are looking for our object of research, while we are trying to define our object of research. I will not go in detail in the epistemology itself, because I think we have done it quite good these days. But what was interesting for me was to discover that epistemology indeed is a quite new word which was only coined in 1854 by Ferrier, and that he used it to indicate that part of gnoseology, which is more concerned with the fundamental of knowledge. Of course, epistemology is formed by two different Greek words, which is episteme, exact knowledge, and logos, discussion. And nowadays, we intend epistemology as the science and as the philosophical investigation of the structure, the methods adopted by the different disciplines. Okay, so in my context, I say epistemology could be a good methodology that I can use to better define my space of investigation. And an interesting exercise that I can do within the epistemological science is to distinguish the different kind of knowledge that I can find during my research, during my journey of research to define my object. And what is interesting is that, as we have seen these days in epistemology, we can distinguish different kinds of knowledge, and among them, we can distinguish a priori knowledge and a posteriori knowledge. So I think we all agree at this point that a priori is that knowledge that basically generates from our interior beliefs and pure intellect. So it is not followed by any subsequent sensorial experience, but it just comes from our intellect and from our spirit, if I have to take the word of Leibniz, maybe. So, for example, an a priori knowledge would be the logical truth. The a priori is opposite to the a posteriori knowledge, which is this knowledge which, yes, it comes also from our interior beliefs and pure intellect, but is followed after from, by some kind of sensorial act which give a more practical sense to the pure intellect action. Okay, so the exercise for me was to make an epistemological reflection on my research project and to try to identify the a priori object characterizing my research. It was a little bit complicated, but finally, I think I will consider in the context, and I considered in the context of my research, a priori, all those assumptions that are generated by my internal beliefs and by all the experience that I have during these years in the academic field, and all the, I would say, manipulation from the environment that I have frequented in the last years. So this is what I consider a priori in my context. In my project, I start from a bio-based question. Of course, I'm a biologist, so I start from a biological question. And the biological question is how Phytophthora zoospores, which are those nice, the pointer is there, okay, so it's there, which are those very nice organisms which are produced by a pathogenic omycete to infect the plant. So how those spores, how those infectious agents are able to sense signal which comes from the plant, and they are able through that to traduce this signal in their active movement migration toward the plant. Once they arrive on the plant, of course, they start the infection, they do their job, which is to be a parasite, and of course they create very, very huge losses in terms of economic and in terms of agronomical losses, which is the reason why we are studying this organism. So the question is how they can sense the signal of the plant and how they can move there. This question is based for me on my a priori biological assumption. And more in detail, sorry, thank you very much. More in detail, the biological priori assumption derive from the fact that we hypothesize, me and my supervisor and all the team that I work with, that those spores can sense the signal coming from the plants thanks to the two flagella that you see. The two flagella that you see, they have a role in the motion because, of course, they help the zoospores to go toward the plant. But we assume from our biological a priori beliefs that they can also have a role in the sensing of the plant signal. And these hypotheses, again, come from our a priori beliefs and from kind of biological observation that we assume for first assumption. For example, we have seen by electron microscopy and by different biological techniques that if you want, I can explain you a little bit more in detail later, that we might have a different composition of plasma membrane between the cell body of the zoospore, which is the rounded shape object that you see, and the flagella. And this different protein composition between the cell body and the flagella might for us explain the ability of flagella to sense the signal, in the sense that the flagella can have a particular protein composition which a set of protein where we can find protein involved in the sensing. Okay, this is our hypothesis and this is our assumption. And for us, of course, a first way to kind of investigate this hypothesis was to integrate a biological or biochemical methodology, which is the analysis of the protein on the flagella and on the cell body, to see if really on the flagella we can find different protein involved in the sensing. Okay, these are my a priori assumption and my a priori hypothesis. But then what I think that is interesting in the context of my PhD is that we are trying a little bit to develop and to integrate this a priori assumption with the physical point of view. This does not mean that I'm putting away my a priori assumption. No, my a priori assumptions are the starting point of my research, but I want to integrate a little bit them by developing a physical approach. Oh, sorry. Indeed, employing an interdisciplinary biophysical approach for me means challenging the a priori of biology to the law of mechanics, explore new questions, and adopt a different point of view. For example, this I will detail a little bit later. If from the biological point of view, I'm investigating a biological organism, which is the result of the asexual reproduction cycle of a particular oomycete, from the physical point of view, I'm investigating a microswimmer, meaning an object which is able to move because he evolved this kind of flagella propulsion system that enable him, the zoospore, sorry, to go and to do his biological function. So really, like by adopting a physical point of view, I really can a little bit shift and integrate and open maybe my biological point of view. And of course, by employing an interdisciplinary approach, we also employ a interdisciplinary method, which means use biological methods, but also use physical methods to go and see more in detail our assumption and our hypothesis. So I think, but again, these are my considerations. I already see that there are different opinions on the topic, but for me, the outcome of this interdisciplinary approach is that I can explore new questions that maybe by using only a biological approach I was not considering. I can consider new aspects, and I can integrate the biological viewpoint. I can also reconsider the object of study critically and openly. And what is very important, I can also recognize possible cognitive and methodological biases by employing the double approach. And I will give you a kind of more concrete example later. Also, of course, adopting this double point of view, I think, and I hope, will also enable us to develop kind of new methodologies that are more, again, a little bit more integrative and can render better the complex vision of the object of study. So my presentation would have finished here, but I did a test. So I have to say that it's a very preliminary test, and I did it a little bit for fun. and to see a little bit the answer and the feelings, to test the feelings among the biology team and the physical team. So my idea was to basically give some questions to both the biology team and physics team to test, to see their impression on the interdisciplinary approach, more in detail to see if biologists were able to adopt a more physical point of view and the physician, to adopt a more biological point of view. So really is a test that everyone would exclude from any article, but is a very preliminary one, but it's just to give an idea. So I gave to my participants 15 questions. Divided in 3 categories: philosophical question, for example, what can be considered a priori in science; biological question, what are those spores for you, for example; or physical question, what is the most proper parameter to measure the spore response to environmental stimuli. But for the biological and physical question, I gave only 2 possible answers, with no correct answer, of course, but the 2 possible answers were one more from the biological point of view, so more from what I think it is the biological point of view, and the other more from the physics point of view, at least what I think is the physics point of view. And this again was to test to see if biologists adopt a more physical point of view and vice versa. So from the first answer they received, for the moment, 9 biologists out of 15 participated and 3 physicians out of 6 participated. It's just the beginning. I see very interestingly that approximately all provide the same answers to the philosophical question. Okay, at least everybody agree on something. And that the biologist team answered mostly by adopting the biological point of view answer, although in several cases they also accepted the physical point of view as true answer. And most interested, I see that the physics team answered both by adopting a biological and a physics point of view, 50-50. Yeah. But this might be explained by more things. First of all, our labs, the physics lab, my lab is a IPO team in ISA, and the physics lab is MIMIC team at INPHYNI. They collaborate since 5 years. So this interdisciplinarity may already have yielded some results that we could observe in the test. And also, I have to say that many physicians in the team of the physics, they are specialized in biophysics. So this maybe, at least this is my consideration, might explain their inclination to adopt both point of view. So this was just a little bit for fun, just to test the level among biologists and physicists. But if I return to my dimension, very egoistically, as I said to you, I see my project based on a biological question, and I see my project started on biological assumption, and I see it integrating, thanks to the interdisciplinary approach, with the notion of the physics. And for example, I can already see that in my first 7 months of PhD, I could already see changement in the way I'm considering my object of study. At the beginning of my PhD, I was completely neglecting the law of physics. Now, for example, I'm very concerned about the fact that when I'm observing my microorganism, I'm in a particular physical environment, which is governed by particular physical laws, which might change all the effect of the environment and all the biological response of my organism. And this, I was not considering that before. And also, I integrated this notion that the spores are biological objects, but can also be seen as microswimmer, meaning objects that move and they have a particular motion mechanism and motion behavior. And also, what I already see is that some biological convention and some biological observation that we carry on were biases, because we have confronted with the physician, and we were sometimes very excited about some results, and the physician say, no, but this is not because of that, but it's because there is, I don't know, I give a stupid example, the law of gravity that is acting on your zoospore, so no, you have to leave this idea. Okay, so this is just to say how I think I'm starting to be manipulated by both the biological and the physical field. I think that finally, of course, the interdisciplinary method might have many aspects that cannot make it work very good, but I think that in general, it really can provide us a more complex vision of the object that we are studying, can maybe help us to define and describe our object of interest or object of research in a more restricted space and more well-defined and maybe characterized space. So this is a little bit my idea, maybe strong. I know I'm a biologist, so I say a lot of things very strong, but is like that. So I would like now to discuss a little bit because